The gift Margaret sat on the stone steps of her cottage, watching the first snowflakes of winter drift past the old oak tree in her front yard. At 62, she had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of her days. The morning coffee by the window, the afternoon spent tending to her small garden, the evenings reading by the fireplace. She had built this simple life deliberately, choosing comfort over complexity after years of running her late husband's technology company. Few people in the small town of Millbrook knew about the fortune she'd accumulated, or the scholarship fund she quietly maintained for local students. Margaret preferred it that way. The sound of hurried footsteps on the gravel path broke through her peaceful reverie. A young man approached, his face etched with worry, his clothes worn but clean. He carried a bundle close to his chest. A baby, she realized. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you might have any milk. My baby, she's hungry and the store is closed and I—" His words trailed off as he looked down at the infant in his arms. Margaret stood slowly, her heart immediately going out to this young father. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of responsibility and worry. "Of course," she said gently. "Please come inside. It's getting cold out here." The young man hesitated. "I don't want to impose, I can pay you for the milk, I have a few dollars." "Nonsense," Margaret replied, already moving toward her front door. "When a baby needs feeding, there's no time for formalities. I'm Margaret, by the way." "David," he answered, following her up the steps. "And this is Emma. She's only 3 months old." Inside the warm cottage, Margaret bustled about her kitchen while David settled into a chair by the fireplace, gently rocking little Emma. The baby's soft cries filled the room, and Margaret could see the tender way David spoke to her, promising that help was coming. As Margaret prepared a bottle, she learned David's story. He was 28, a construction worker who'd been laid off when the weather turned cold. Emma's mother had left them when the baby was just 6 weeks old, unable to handle the responsibility. David had been managing on his own ever since, doing odd jobs when he could find them, stretching every dollar. "I've never been much of a cook," David admitted, watching Margaret warm the milk with practiced ease. "But I'm learning. Emma deserves better than what I can give her right now, but I'm trying." Margaret handed him the bottle, watching as he carefully tested the temperature on his wrist, a gesture that spoke of love and attention to detail despite his circumstances. "You're doing exactly what a good father does," she said softly. "You're putting her needs first. That's what matters most." As Emma began to drink, her crying ceased, replaced by the contented sounds of a satisfied baby. David's shoulders finally relaxed, and Margaret saw something she recognized, the profound relief that comes when you've been able to provide for someone you love. "I should probably head home," David said after Emma had finished eating. "I don't want to take up more of your time." But Margaret was already moving toward her pantry. "Let me send you home with a few things. I have more than I need." She began gathering items: canned soup, bread, baby formula, more milk. David protested, but Margaret waved away his concerns. "I raised 3 children of my own," she said, though she didn't mention that those children were now adults living their own busy lives across the country. "I know how quickly a baby can go through formula, and you need to keep your strength up too." As she packed the groceries, Margaret found herself thinking about the early days of her own motherhood. She remembered the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the way her husband would take over the late-night feedings so she could rest. She remembered how her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had appeared at her door with homemade soup when the twins were colicky, asking for nothing in return. Kindness, she had learned, was often passed forward rather than paid back. "I can't accept all this," David said, looking at the bags Margaret had prepared. "You've already done so much." Margaret turned to face him, seeing her own children's faces in his worried expression. "David, let me tell you something I've learned in my 62 years on this earth. We're all just walking each other home. Sometimes we're the ones who need help, and sometimes we're the ones who can give it. Right now I'm in a position to give and you're in a position to receive. There's no shame in that. Someday when you're doing better, you'll help someone else. That's how it works. She paused, watching Emma sleep peacefully in her father's arms. Besides, she added with a gentle smile, this old house has been too quiet lately. It was nice to hear a baby's voice again. David's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Margaret replied. Just take care of that beautiful little girl. Love her. Be patient with yourself. You're doing better than you think you are. As David prepared to leave, Margaret wrote something on a piece of paper. This is my phone number, she said. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. I mean that. David looked at the paper, then at Margaret. Why are you being so kind to us? Margaret considered the question as she looked at this young father who reminded her of her own children when they were struggling to find their way in the world. Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most, she said simply, and because that little girl deserves to grow up in a world where people look out for each other. After David and Emma left, Margaret sat back down on her stone steps, despite the cold. The snow was falling more steadily now, creating a soft blanket over her yard. She thought about the evening ahead, quiet, peaceful, and somehow fuller than it had been that morning. She didn't know that David would find steady work within the month, or that he would stop by every few weeks to show her how Emma was growing. She didn't know that he would eventually meet Sarah, a kind woman who would become a loving stepmother to Emma, or that they would name their first child together Margaret in honor of the woman who had helped them when they needed it most. All Margaret knew was that she had done what felt right in the moment. She had seen a need and responded with the resources she had available. It was as simple and as profound as that. Years later, when Margaret's own health began to fail, David would be among the neighbors who checked on her daily, bringing groceries and companionship. Emma, now a bright young girl, would read to Margaret from her favorite books, and Sarah would cook the meals that reminded Margaret of her own mother's kitchen. But on this snowy evening, Margaret simply sat in the growing darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of her neighborhood settling in for the night. She thought about the unexpected gift of the day, the reminder that kindness is never wasted, that human connection can bloom in the most ordinary moments, and that we are all, in our own ways, walking each other home. The snow continued to fall, covering the path where a young father had approached her door, transforming the landscape into something clean and new. Margaret smiled to herself as she finally went inside, already looking forward to what tomorrow might bring.